Welcome to section 3, 3D modeling custom elements. In this section, we're going to be talking about creating custom pieces that will enhance your model and getting into the more intricate parts of 3D modeling, as well as getting into how to create your own custom families and build out your own library of custom pieces that will really enhance your 3D model and make it a unique piece. In section 3.1, we're going to introduce the family editor. What we're going to do in this particular part, we're going to jump into the user interface because it does change a little bit how the family editor is laid out versus how an actual architectural project is laid out. We're going to be talking about the various templates and things that come out of the box in Revit and how to use those. But then once we're in the family editor, we'll get into the solid modeling tools as well as the void tools that come in as far as building up the physical model of it. And then I'm going to show one slightly more complex family and how you can use these simple modeling tools to build up a more complex model and create the kind of look that you're after. So as we get into Revit, we've been coming up here and hitting new project. Today we're going to be coming in new family. So under the new family creation tool, we've got a bunch of different template options here, everything from balusters all the way down to windows. And which one we select makes a big difference in how Revit treats it. Because if you recall, the line weights within Revit are defined by different family types or different categories. So your casework has a different line weight, say your windows do. So if I were to make a window in the casework family, all of a sudden that window would look like casework as far as line weights go. It would also be treated differently by Revit as far as how it interacts with the things around it. So if you want something to interact with a wall, you need to use a family type that typically interacts with a wall, like a window family would interact with a wall typically. So those kind of things do make a difference, and whatever you're building, you should probably put it within the specific family type that it's going to be. So we're not going to get into all of these. Each one of them is a little bit different depending on what you're building. So we're just going to get into a generic model family. And so we'll hit open. And as we get in here, you'll notice there are some things that are different right away. We don't have our architecture tab. We just have a create tab. We have a bunch of different tools here. It automatically opens up some views for us. We don't have north, south, east, and west. We just have a front, back, left, and right elevation. And our floor plan is now called a reference level. And then instead of elevation markers all the way around, we do have this kind of crosshair in the middle here. Now, the crosshair defines kind of the center of our family. And the center cross, or the center point here, defines the anchor point that we bring the family in at. So if I model my entire family up into the right here in this upper right quadrant, when I bring that family in, when I go to click and place it, I'm going to be placing it by that bottom left corner of the model. If I model everything around a center point, which is this, I'm going to be placing it using the center point of that family. So which direction you model does make a difference in terms of how it comes into your project and how you place it using that anchor point. So if we get up here into the Create tab, we'll take a look at some of these 3D modeling options. So you've got extrusion, blend, revolve, sweep, swept blend, and then the void form of all of those. They're the same tools. It's just these are making solid forms. These are cutting away at those solid forms. So an extrusion is basically you go ahead and you draw a shape, and then you define how tall or how deep you want it to be, and it will take your sketch and extrude it up. Blend, you set the distance between two sketches and it interpolates between the two. A revolve, you set an axis and draw a shape along one side, and then it will spin it around that axis. You can define whether it's going to be 360 degrees, 90 degrees, however far you want that shape to actually revolve around that axis. The sweep option is essentially an extrusion that turns the corner. So you sketch a path, and then you sketch the profile that you want along that path, and then it will go ahead and extrude it along the path that you've defined. And then a swept blend is a combination of a sweep and a blend. So essentially you draw a path, you sketch two different shapes at either end, and it interpolates between the two along the path that you've created. And then the void forms are those exact same things as I said. So as we get into this, we're going to create an extrusion, and we've got our sketch tools up here. I'm going to go ahead and just create a fairly simple just square here. And once I have this square created, you'll see now under my properties window, I have an extrusion, and then I've got this option for an extrusion start and end. Which one is which does not really make a difference. If the 1 foot was over here rather than on the start side rather than on the end side, you would get the same result. So if I punch in 3 foot there and 0 foot there and hit my green check mark and go to my 3D view, I have a 3 foot tall, 1.5 by 1.5 foot kind of form here. Now, if I go ahead and change this to 3 feet and change this to 0 feet, nothing changes. It's the exact same result. But if I come in here and hit 2 foot, it goes ahead and jumps down to the 2 foot. You'll notice I also have these anchors now where I can kind of drag things back and forth. It's not real precise, so if I drag the height of this up a little bit, you'll see that all of a sudden my height is changing at kind of weird intervals. So it's not a real precise measurement if you want to use the anchors, but if you want something a little more precise, you can come in here and punch in those exact dimensions. Now, I'm not going to get into some of these other options here because we're going to get into those when we talk about parameters and the kind of power of parameters within the family editor, but also when modeling custom options within a project itself. So if I come up here to my Create tab again, and I hit my void forms, and let's create a void extrusion to go along with our solid extrusion. I'm going to go ahead and draw a shape down here on the bottom. And then I'm going to say this is only going to go up a foot. If I hit my green check mark, it's going to go ahead and cut that out. So you can see I can still hover over and select that if I want to. I can drag the edge and make my cutout a little bit bigger if I want. I can make it a little bit taller if I want to, but I can kind of fiddle with that as I see fit. If you ever get something that comes in, if you create a void and it comes in and looks something like this, where you have, it's not really cutting anything, it's just giving you a yellow kind of line work, what that's telling you is that it's not actually cutting any physical form. So what you need to do is come up here to cut geometry, you select the void option, and then you select the solid option, and it goes ahead and cuts out that geometry. That can be hugely beneficial. That cut and uncut geometry can be hugely beneficial if you have a bunch of objects on here. So let's say this wasn't the first object I created. I created a more intricate sort of array of 4 or 5 things, and I only wanted this to cut out this piece. When I make this void form, it's probably going to cut all of the shapes that it's encountering. And I can come in and say, no, I'm going to uncut it from this shape, and this shape, and it'll go ahead and uncut from the ones I don't want it to interact with, and then only cut out the one shape that I do. So these seem like fairly simple kind of forms, but if you're creative with them, you can build just about anything. So an example of something that's a little bit more complex, it's not super complex, but it does give us a chance to look at something that's a little bit different. So this is a cooktop that I've created a little while back based on some specs of an appliance manufacturer. And basically what I have here, this little piece that I've got here is a sweep. It could have also been an extrusion. I could have just drawn the shape and extruded that along there. I have a sweep here that runs all the way around the outside, and then I just sketched this little shape there. All of this is just an extrusion itself. So if I go into edit extrusion, you'll see I've got all of my kind of sketch work in there to create those. And then I have some options down here for things like this is a revolve. And then I have this little bit here that's an extrusion with a void extrusion over top of it to get the kind of rounded front to them. I also have a little bit of a void sweep here to cut out the little kind of panel on the front. So as you build certain things up, you can build up with all sorts of different pieces and parts that make something that's more complex. And then when I have all these parts put together, I can load this entire thing in as a component in my project. So if you recall the desk that we had used before, that desk is made up a bunch of just different extrusions and sweeps to build that entire form. So, but when we bring it into the project, it acts as one giant mass rather than a bunch of separate little pieces and parts to it. So as you get used to and familiar with these tools, you'll get better and better with how creative you can be with them. and create more complex and intricate shapes to create the families and the kind of depth and richness within your families that you actually want and need.